He thought she was just another inexperienced attorney. Judge Arthur Coleman watched with thinly veiled contempt as Olivia Prescott stood before his court in her plain beige sweater. "Are you actually prepared to handle this case?" he asked mockingly, expecting her to crumble. But when she began to speak, quoting precedents and landmark rulings only the most seasoned lawyers would know, the smug smile on his face quickly vanished. This so-called simple woman wasn't what she appeared to be, and she was about to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. That morning, sunlight streamed into Olivia's Boston apartment as she stood before the mirror, carefully altering her appearance. At 38, she was one of New England's most formidable civil rights attorneys, known for dismantling corporate giants and even arguing successfully before the Supreme Court. But today, she wasn't dressing for recognition. She tied her hair into a simple bun, swapped her pearl earrings for nothing at all, traded her tailored navy suit for a modest beige sweater and plain black pants, and chose an old, scuffed briefcase instead of her usual polished leather one. Even her glasses were replaced with an outdated pair. "This has to work," she whispered to herself, steadying her breath. She had studied Judge Arthur Coleman for months, 15 years on the bench, and a reputation for favoring corporations over individuals, especially when the attorney was a woman. He prided himself on putting inexperienced lawyers in their place. Olivia knew that if she walked in looking like the polished Harvard graduate she was, he would dismiss her before she even opened her mouth. 3 months earlier, the residents of Riverside Gardens, a modest retirement community, had turned to her for help. Westlake Development, a powerful real estate company, had set their sights on the property. Their plan: force out dozens of elderly, lower-income residents and replace their homes with luxury condos. Through legal loopholes and underhanded tactics, they were close to succeeding. Another attorney had already tried and failed in front of Coleman, practically laughed out of the courtroom. Olivia was their last hope, but she had a strategy. "If he underestimates me, he won't see the strike coming," she explained to her colleague Marcus. "So your plan is to let him think you're inexperienced?" Marcus had asked, skeptical. "I'm not lying," she clarified. "I just won't correct his assumptions. That will be his mistake." As she left her apartment, her phone buzzed. A message from Gloria Winters, a 78-year-old resident in the heart of Riverside Gardens. "We're all counting on you, dear." "God bless." Olivia smiled softly, determination hardening in her chest. This case wasn't about prestige. It was about people's homes, dignity, and the right to age in peace. At the courthouse, Olivia blended easily into the crowd. No one gave her a second glance. A few attorneys nodded politely, not realizing she was the same woman who had once stood victorious before the nation's highest court. Inside, she spotted the opposition, 3 attorneys in sharp suits led by Richard Daniels, a man with deep corporate ties and an ego to match. He gave her only a passing glance. "Are you the paralegal?" he asked, smirking. "I'm representing Riverside Gardens," she answered evenly. Daniels chuckled, turning back to his colleagues. His body language screamed, "This will be easy." Moments later, Gloria and several elderly residents shuffled into the courtroom, sitting directly behind Olivia. Gloria leaned forward and squeezed her shoulder. "Thank you for doing this, Miss Prescott. We couldn't afford another big-name lawyer." Olivia gave her a reassuring smile. Sometimes the unexpected approach works best. "I'll rise for the Honorable Judge Arthur Coleman." The bailiff's voice boomed. Coleman entered, tall and severe, his silver hair and sharp eyes giving him the air of authority he thrived on. He scanned the courtroom. His gaze lingered on Daniels and his team with familiar approval before shifting to Olivia. He studied her modest appearance, then narrowed his eyes. "I see we have new counsel for the plaintiffs," he remarked dryly. "Let's hope we don't waste the court's time today." Olivia kept her face neutral. She had studied 16 of his past rulings on housing disputes, memorized his blind spots, and anticipated his arrogance. The performance had already begun. "Your Honor," she said, deliberately softening her usually commanding tone, "we're prepared to proceed." Coleman raised an eyebrow. "Are you?" "We'll see about that." Richard Daniels launched into his argument with the polish of a man used to winning. He spoke of zoning laws, city council approvals, and economic viability with rehearsed confidence. His words were slick, technical, and devoid of humanity. "Your Honor, Westlake Development has followed every regulation to the letter. The property's current use is simply no longer sustainable." Coleman nodded, clearly impressed. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels." Clear and concise as always. Then he turned to Olivia, impatience etched into every line of his face. "Ms. Prescott, your response?" Olivia rose slowly, fumbling with her notes just enough to look unpolished. She saw Coleman glance at his watch, already dismissing her. But this was exactly what she wanted. Your Honor, she began, her voice calm but restrained. Riverside Gardens has been home to over 60 senior citizens for more than 20 years. And what Westlake calls progress, she paused, locking eyes with the judge, is in fact displacement. It is stripping vulnerable people of the only homes they've ever known. The room fell quiet. For the first time, Coleman leaned forward, curious despite himself. Olivia had begun her move. The residents had legal leases protecting their homes, but before Olivia could elaborate, Judge Coleman interrupted with a sharp tone. Miss Prescott, I'm perfectly aware of what a lease is. Spare me the lectures. What I need are legal arguments, not emotional appeals. Laughter flickered across the faces of the Westlake attorneys, smirk spreading exactly as Olivia had predicted. She feigned a nervous smile. Of course, Your Honor. My apologies, she said, allowing her voice to waver just slightly. The residents are contesting the validity of the zoning change. We believe proper notification procedures were never followed. Coleman sighed loudly, clearly unimpressed. And your evidence for this? Olivia slid a stack of documents forward. We have sworn affidavits from residents stating they never received the legally required notices. Coleman barely glanced at the papers. Affidavits can be drafted by anyone, Miss Prescott. That hardly proves anything. Richard Daniels seized the moment, rising confidently. Your Honor, we have signed receipts confirming that all notices were delivered, exactly as required by statute. Coleman nodded approvingly. Indeed. Which means this appears to be a very straightforward matter. Their documentation exists. Yours does not. Olivia hesitated for a beat, just long enough for it to look like inexperience, then pressed forward. Your Honor. There's also the matter of the historical significance of the property. That status would require additional review before any redevelopment could take place. Coleman pinched the bridge of his nose and lowered his glasses, irritation radiating. Miss Prescott, is this your first major case? The courtroom fell still. Even Daniels, normally smug, looked uneasy at the judge's bluntness. I've handled a number of matters, Your Honor. Olivia replied evenly, careful not to overstate her record. I thought as much, Coleman said, his voice dripping with condescension. Allow me to explain. Perhaps in law school they told you that passion carries weight in a courtroom. It doesn't. Evidence does. Precedent does, and so far you've presented me with neither. Behind Olivia, the elderly residents shifted nervously. Gloria, the 78-year-old face of their fight, lowered her eyes in disappointment. Now, Coleman continued, his voice booming, do you actually have legal arguments worth my time? Or shall I end this little exercise? Olivia remained standing, her face calm, betraying nothing of the humiliation he tried to heap on her. This moment was exactly what she had anticipated. Coleman flexing his authority, dismissing her as a simple, unprepared woman. Your Honor, she said softly, may I have a moment to confer with my clients? Coleman waved his hand, already shuffling his papers. Very well. Be quick. I have a ruling to make. As Olivia turned to whisper to Gloria and the others, Daniels leaned back smugly, his expression already one of triumph. Coleman looked bored, glancing at his watch. Don't worry. Olivia whispered to the residents, her tone steady. This is going exactly as I planned. Gloria frowned. But he's ignoring everything you say. Olivia met her eyes with quiet certainty. He'll listen. Just trust me. When Olivia turned back, her demeanor shifted, just slightly. Her shoulders squared, her back straightened, and her voice carried a subtle new weight, though still cloaked in modesty. Your Honor, she said, I'd like to submit evidence regarding docket 62B, specifically the property's classification under municipal code. Coleman frowned, skeptical. The defense has already covered zoning issues. Not zoning, Your Honor. Olivia replied smoothly. Historical preservation eligibility under the Williams precedent. A flicker of surprise passed over Coleman's face. Daniels immediately cut in. Irrelevant, Your Honor. That case doesn't apply. Olivia ignored him, keeping her eyes on the judge. With your permission, I'll explain why it is relevant. Coleman studied her with narrowed eyes, curiosity slipping into his expression. Proceed, Miss Prescott. But be brief. It was the first crack in his armor, and Olivia pressed forward. Williams v. Northeastern Development 2008, she said steadily. The Third Circuit held that properties housing primarily elderly residents for over 20 years qualify for expedited historical review, regardless of prior designation. Coleman stiffened, his interest piqued despite himself. That case doesn't apply here, Daniels argued, his voice less confident now. On the contrary, Your Honor, Olivia countered, pulling a document from her briefcase. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court cited Williams just last year in Geller v. Boston Housing Authority. Page 47 of the ruling extends its principle to all New England states. The judge flipped through her brief, scanning quickly. The courtroom held its breath as silence stretched. Furthermore, Olivia continued, her voice firmer now. Riverside Gardens meets all 5 criteria established in Geller for emergency preservation status. She withdrew another document. Here's a breakdown of each point, with supporting evidence. Coleman looked up, his dismissiveness gone, replaced by something else: respect. You seem remarkably well versed in preservation law, Miss Prescott, he remarked. I find it's an overlooked area in housing disputes, she replied with deliberate modesty. For the next half hour, Olivia unfolded her case with precision, citing precedents Coleman had nearly forgotten, quoting municipal code from memory, weaving law and strategy seamlessly. The residents behind her sat taller with every word. Gloria's doubt began to fade, replaced by cautious hope. Meanwhile, Daniels and his colleagues whispered frantically, scrambling to counter arguments they clearly hadn't prepared for. Finally, Daniels rose, his voice strained. Your Honor, the defense requests a recess to review these claims. Coleman, still watching Olivia with newfound intrigue, gave a short nod. 15 minutes. As he rose from the bench, he paused, fixing Olivia with a thoughtful gaze. Miss Prescott, I'd like to see you in my chambers. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Daniels stiffened. The residents exchanged glances, their hope solidifying into belief. Olivia calmly gathered her papers, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. Everything was unfolding exactly as she had planned. Coleman shut the door and faced them, his expression measured. Mr. Daniels, were you aware of these precedents? Daniels cleared his throat. We did review the relevant case law, Your Honor, but found those specific rulings not applicable to the present matter. In what way are they different? Coleman pressed. Miss Prescott's analysis of the similarities seems rather solid. Olivia stayed quiet, observing as the balance shifted. The same judge who had brushed her aside an hour earlier was now leaning on her arguments to challenge Daniels. Daniels tugged at his tie. With due respect, Your Honor, Ms. Prescott is disregarding crucial distinctions in property valuation and municipal considerations. I am not disregarding them. Olivia cut in evenly. They are addressed in Section 3 of my filing. In fact, Professor Abernathy's Harvard Law Review article directly dismantles the valuation point in comparable cases. Coleman's brow lifted. Harvard Law Review. You're acquainted with Abernathy's scholarship? Yes, Your Honor, she answered plainly. Coleman regarded her more carefully now. Miss Prescott, where did you receive your legal training? The moment had arrived sooner than she had planned. Meeting his eyes without hesitation, Olivia replied, Harvard Law School. Your Honor, class of 2008. Daniels blinked in shock. Coleman's face revealed little, though his tone sharpened. And your practice? I haven't seen you in my courtroom before. I've recently moved to this jurisdiction, Olivia explained. Prior to that, I practiced in Boston, mainly in civil rights and housing discrimination matters. Coleman leaned back slightly. Any cases that I would be familiar with? A small smile crossed Olivia's lips. Perhaps Prescott v. Department of Housing and Urban Development. His reaction was subtle yet telling. Eyes widened, lips parting briefly. He knew it. Everyone in the legal field did. That case had reached the Supreme Court 2 years ago and set a new precedent in nationwide housing enforcement. You're that Olivia Prescott? Disbelief colored his voice. Yes, Your Honor. Daniels glanced between them, visibly puzzled. Coleman quickly regained his professional composure. Let's return to the courtroom. We still have matters to address. When proceedings resumed, the tone in the chamber was entirely different. Judge Coleman, once dismissive, now listened with wary respect. He no longer interrupted her. Your Honor, Olivia began, her voice carrying more natural authority. I'd like to submit Exhibit C, the original Riverside Gardens Community Charter. She walked to the bench and handed him a much older document. This charter, established in 1972, contains a covenant protecting residents from displacement by commercial development. Coleman examined it. This looks like a private agreement. Miss Prescott, its enforceability against new ownership is doubtful. Normally I'd agree, Olivia replied, confidence surfacing now. However, in Latimer v. Crescent Development, the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that such covenants remain binding when incorporated into the original property deed, and this one was. She presented another document. It was recorded with the county as Addendum B. I've highlighted the relevant text. Daniels shot to his feet. Your Honor, this was never provided to us during discovery. Olivia turned to him without flinching. It was Mr. Daniels. Second production set, page 147 of our March 15th response. Coleman raised an eyebrow. Is that accurate, Mr. Daniels? The corporate attorney faltered, whispering with his team until an associate reluctantly slid a folder over. Daniels's face tightened as he spotted the cited page. It appears it was included, Your Honor. By now the entire room was riveted. The gallery had grown crowded as word spread that something unusual was unfolding. Miss Prescott, Coleman said, regarding her with new interest. You mentioned recently relocating. What brought you to this case? It was a rare personal question from the bench. Olivia recognized it for what it was, an attempt to truly understand her. I believe everyone deserves equal protection under the law, she said, especially those who are easily overlooked, such as elderly residents facing corporate development pressure, Coleman suggested. Exactly, Your Honor. He turned to Daniels. Counselor, your response to this covenant. Daniels adjusted his tie, rattled. Would contend that subsequent zoning changes override the covenant, Your Honor. And further, the city's economic interests, Olivia cut in with quiet force, do not supersede the legal rights of these residents. Her entire bearing had shifted now, strong, authoritative, unwavering. Miss Prescott, Coleman said, you've presented a remarkably comprehensive case. One might ask, why the subdued approach at first? The air in the courtroom tightened. He was openly admitting his earlier misjudgment. Olivia held his gaze. Because, Your Honor, people tend to see only what they expect. These residents are ignored because they're elderly, on fixed incomes, not dressed in designer suits. But their rights remain intact, no matter appearances. A murmur swept through the crowd. Coleman's expression shifted, caught between discomfort and admiration. Sometimes, Olivia continued, the only way to reveal bias is to let it play out in real time. Coleman leaned back slowly, realization dawning. So you chose to present yourself this way? I chose to let the law speak for itself, Your Honor, Olivia said. The way those arguments were first received proved instructive. Daniels, recognizing the shift in momentum, tried to reassert control. Your Honor, while Miss Prescott's theatrics may be engaging, they do not alter the legal reality. Mr. Daniels, Coleman cut in sharply, I would advise against describing counsel's work as theatrics. The arguments presented by Ms. Prescott are substantive and deserving of serious consideration. Olivia hid a smile. The transformation was now undeniable. For the record, she said, pulling papers from her briefcase, I'd like to submit my credentials and bar admissions to this court. She handed them to the clerk, including my role as lead counsel in Prescott v. along with 7 other federal housing rights cases. Coleman accepted the documents with a nod. So noted, Counselor. The choice of title was intentional, a professional respect he had withheld earlier. The message was clear. Judge Arthur Coleman now recognized Olivia Prescott for exactly who she was. Clearing his throat, Coleman glanced across the silent courtroom, preparing to deliver his ruling. The change in his demeanor toward Olivia was plain to all. Condescension replaced by respect. Based on the evidence and arguments presented, I am granting a preliminary injunction against Westlake Development's proposed eviction of Riverside Gardens residents, he announced. The covenant issue raised by Ms. Prescott raises significant legal questions that must be resolved before any development moves forward. Relieved gasps and muffled applause spread through the gallery. Gloria wiped tears from her eyes, leaning forward to squeeze Olivia's shoulder. Furthermore, Coleman continued, I am ordering an independent review of the zoning change process. The record suggests that proper notification procedures may not have been followed. His stern gaze fixed on Daniels. This court takes potential irregularities very seriously, particularly when vulnerable populations are affected. Daniels rose, his composure wavering. Your Honor, this delay will cost my client millions. Your client's financial concerns do not override due process, Mr. Daniels. Coleman interrupted firmly. Perhaps Westlake should have considered that before pursuing this property. As Coleman wrapped up the session and set dates for further hearings, Olivia calmly gathered her materials. The contrast between her modest appearance and commanding courtroom presence now intrigued rather than messled the observers. Outside, a swarm of reporters waited, news of the dramatic turn having already spread. Olivia shielded the elderly residents, guiding them through the throng and deflecting questions with practiced ease. Ms. Prescott, one persistent reporter called. Is it true you deliberately downplayed your credentials to expose judicial bias? Olivia paused briefly. I presented the arguments required to defend my clients' homes. How those arguments were received, before and after my background became known, is for others to consider. As she led the group down the courthouse steps, Judge Coleman exited from a side door. Spotting her, he hesitated, then adjusted course. Counselor, he said quietly, just for her. That was an effective demonstration. Olivia met his eyes evenly. Thank you, Your Honor. I wonder, he added, how many other attorneys have stood before me with valid arguments I may have overlooked because of similar assumptions? That's not for me to answer, Judge Coleman, Olivia replied calmly. He gave a solemn nod. No, but it is for me to consider. He glanced toward the elderly residents nearby. You've given them a real chance. A law gave them that chance, Olivia corrected gently. I only made sure it was upheld. Coleman studied her for a moment longer. I look forward to seeing you in my courtroom again, Miss Prescott. Perhaps next time, less need for strategic presentation. With a brief nod, he walked away, unnoticed by the bustling courthouse crowd. Gloria approached, eyes shining with tears. You did it, Olivia. You really did it. Olivia smiled, slipping an arm around her shoulders. This is only the beginning, Gloria. But today, they saw you, truly saw you. As they descended the courthouse steps, Olivia reflected. She had entered knowing she would be dismissed, underestimated, nearly humiliated. But she had also known that the only way to expose bias was from the inside. That day, in Judge Coleman's courtroom, justice wasn't only delivered in the legal sense. A deeper truth had been revealed. That ability and worth were never tied to appearances, and that even authority figures could be gravely mistaken. In the weeks that followed, Olivia's success at Riverside Gardens became a touchstone in legal circles. Judge Coleman, true to his word, began building a reputation for fairer treatment of all attorneys before him. As for Olivia, she pressed on, sometimes in tailored suits, sometimes in simple sweaters, but always with the same brilliant mind and unwavering devotion to justice. One morning, preparing for another case, she paused at her mirror. The woman staring back wasn't defined by clothing or image. Her strength came from her knowledge, compassion, and refusal to let prejudice stand in the way of justice. With a quiet smile, she lifted her briefcase and stepped out, ready for whatever came next. If this story resonated with you, remember, appearances rarely reveal the full truth of someone's worth. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us perception and reality often diverge, and that courage and intellect can reshape even the most rigid systems. Until next time, never judge by appearances. A modest exterior can conceal extraordinary ability, and those too quick to dismiss others may find themselves humbled by a powerful lesson. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked, or witnessed someone succeed despite being overlooked? Share your stories. They inspire us to keep telling these truths about justice and resilience.